So my take on future knowledge environments is basically that we have been in physical environments to understand and share knowledge all throughout human history, basically. I mean, since we invented fire, we have sat down in a space and we have communicated knowledge between each other. And over time, these spaces have become more and more facilitated to and be more specifically designed to do different things. And when it comes to sharing spaces for knowledge, it could be anything from a school to a conference environment or whatnot. But what we've seen over the past 10, 15, 20 years is the emergence of basically a new kind of layer going on top of our physical space, and that is the processes of digitalization, where individuals and organizations have started to utilize technologies in the context of knowledge. So obviously the whole of the internet has meant we negotiate knowledge differently in groups and in society at large. But that also changes basically how we actually use a physical space. And I mean, from the very simple things like desk design, when we had big stationary computers, desks were accommodated to support that, and now obviously they are looking very different. But what's happening now, as technology evolves over time, is that we start to see new emerging practices where we need to sort of renegotiate our idea of what the physical space is in the context of digitalization. So what I mean by that is that, for example, when it comes to knowledge and understanding knowledge, one thing that digitalization implies is that data becomes all the more important. Actually knowing what goes on in a given process becomes valuable as an output, and that goes for knowledge spaces as well. So for example, if we take an educational environment or a conference environment or a boardroom environment, the decision making that goes on in those places or the test that is made, I mean, that's crucial core business for those specific practices. So then obviously knowing more about how that process is in that physical space becomes more important. And what we see now is the emergence of being able to use, for example, the revolutioning approaches in Internet of Things to see how we can basically better understand what goes on in a place through data gathering and raising the level or the frequency of our data accumulation. So, for example, we all know that if somebody writes a test or if we're sitting in a boardroom environment and somebody outside of the room starts drilling with a big drill with a lot of noise, that will seriously implicate our possibilities to actually learn or communicate anything in that room. But that also goes for a very low intermittent sound that I might not be aware of, but that actually hinders me in my cognition in that particular moment. So for example, the road outside of the window might suddenly have raised noise levels at a particular moment in time. What would happen if we actually start to understand that in a room and we can get feedback from the room that tells us about our physical affordances in real time? For a teacher, that might mean that you wouldn't have the test when there's a raised noise level on the street outside. Or for the boardroom environment, you might change the color of the light to support a different kind of conversation. There's all these kinds of things that are starting to emerge where the sort of layer of digitalization going over the physical space starts to shift what we actually do and how we do things in that space. And that is a very exciting shift, since these physical spaces, we take them for so much granted, and actually sort of reframing how we do things can sometimes be a bit tricky and hard. And sort of placing ourselves in this new position of understanding, looking sort of, okay, what does it mean when a person coming into a room has technology that changes the affordances of that room? What does it mean when an organization builds a system in a building that changes how we actually work in that space? What does it mean when we build the spaces? what does this mean when it comes to data and data sharing in a space? Who should understand what goes on in the space? Is the energy levels only relevant for the people working in the building, or should the actual user in the building have some kind of other knowledge brought out from that data? How do we secure data in buildings? That becomes a really big, tricky question. So there's all these kinds of things happening when we suddenly perceive data being a part of the ecosystem of learning and knowledge creation in a room. And that journey we've just sort of started on, and there's a lot to be understood and explored in the future to come.